For $300, the Ayaneo Pocket Air might be the best Android gaming handheld you can get right now. And while it's a bit expensive for an Android device, the total package is honestly well worth the price, especially if you're a cloud and emulation gaming fan. We'll review how the Pocket Air ranks amongst its peers, what makes it stand out, and why you should consider picking it up. Android handhelds are unique, considering any Android smartphone can slap on a gamepad peripheral and become a dedicated gaming device. That's part of why devices like the Logitech G Cloud and Ayaneo Odin are less popular than the Backbone or Razer Kishi V2. Luckily for the Pocket Air, it boasts a MediaTek Dimensity 1200 processor to handle native Android cloud and emulated gaming. This processor performs similarly to the Qualcomm Snapdragon 870. It can run games like Genshin Impact at 30 FPS or Call of Duty Mobile at 60. Helping to cool the processor down is a controllable built-in exhaust fan on the back. The fan is silent at its lowest setting, but can get pretty loud at max. However, I don't find a need to max out the fan for any of the games that we've tried. The Pocket Air also benefits from 6 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM that you can upgrade to 8 for $379 or $459 for 12. Those price increases also apply to the storage, with the lowest option starting at 128 gigs and the highest capping out at 512. You can expand the Pocket Air's internal storage with microSD, but you also get a 3.2 USB-C port and a 3.5mm headphone jack IO-wise. What's nice is that the microSD card slot doubles as a SIM card holder for up to 4G connections. Most other handhelds require an upcharge for 4G broadband capabilities, but Ayaneo makes it available with the Pocket Air base model. Honestly, because of its compact size, it works very well as a device on the go. And as its name suggests, the Pocket Air is built for the on-the-go gaming. It only weighs 380 grams, or just under a pound, and is small enough to fit in your back pocket. If you're wearing jeans designed for men, you can. Why do they not put robust pockets on women clothing? I don't get it. Regardless, this system can be easily carried around without feeling too bulky. And with its 7350 mAh battery, you can use it all day and then some on a single charge, even with screen brightness on high. Speaking of the screen though, the Pocket Air comes with a 5.5-inch AMOLED touchscreen. I prefer the bezel-less design of the Ayaneo 2S since the black bars on this are pretty pronounced, but it's nothing detrimental to the experience. The small form factor also extends to the gamepad. It's close to the shape of the Ayaneo 2S, although my pinkies tend to dangle off the bottom, and the small size also extends to the D-pad, face buttons, and thumbsticks, but we'll talk a bit about how these feel in the hands a little later. The bumpers and triggers, however, are not that small, but the triggers could be a bit lower to rest your fingers on. Both the triggers and the thumbsticks use Hall effect sensors, making them accurate and severely less prone to stick drift. Aesthetically, I think the Pocket Air is one of Ayaneo's best looking devices they've released. This Pocket Air is the retro edition, sporting a red and white color pattern reminiscent of the Game & Watch back in the day. The built-in LED rings on both thumbsticks add to this look and can be customized with various glow pattern profiles in the IO window quick access menu. Now, as far as software, the Pocket Air comes preloaded with several pieces of proprietary Ayaneo software, including its signature IOSpace app, IO Window, and IO Home. The difference with this version of IOSpace is that it's mostly used for managing game emulation ROMs by working with front ends like Pegasus that manage retro game libraries. However, I couldn't get it properly set up due to a lack of documentation and a faulty one-click solution that only displays in Chinese. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a bit, but seeing as this could potentially be someone's first time learning to emulate a game, it can be more than frustrating. And unfortunately, this has become a common occurrence with IOSpace, as the software just isn't up to par with other similar software like Armory Crate or third-party front loaders like Lootbox. While its basic functionality gets the job done, Ayaneo needs to take the time to iron out the kinks for non-Chinese speaking users before more people can adopt it, especially when they're sending it to Western media such as ourselves. And while IOSpace is frustrating on the Pocket Air, the dedicated quick access sidebar, IO Window, is far more intuitive. Like in its other handhelds, Ayaneo gives you quick access to manage your device's settings and functions with dedicated buttons below the right thumbstick. Since this is an Android device, you can't control the TDP to enhance game performance. Still, you can get real-time information like FPS, power usage frequencies, and more. You can also control things like fan speed and turn on features like the gamepad, the onboard LEDs, and Sound Tap Magic, another of Ayaneo's proprietary software. The last Ayaneo app that comes loaded on the Pocket Air is Ayaneo. This app replaces the stock Android OS by removing the home screen and leaving a scrollable list of installed apps. It would have been fine if Ayaneo was more like a launcher like iSpace. Instead, it's a bare bones approach to what could have been an easy way for users to personalize their main dashboard. It's almost like the two apps should be merged into one, but needed to be separate for whatever development reasons. Now, we were impressed and disappointed after using the Pocket Air. Out of the box, you'll need to find or download all of the game libraries you intend to use before you start playing anything. When it comes to emulating, it can be a pretty intensive process if you haven't done it before. Although Ayaneo heavily promotes retro gaming for its devices, the company doesn't tell you how to start. That is entirely up to you to figure out. Legally, they can't provide ROMs or BIOS for you to download, which is understandable. Still, having a reference that could help you understand how it works would have been nice for the first-time user. And on top of learning how to get everything working, I found that the iSpace app built to manage all of the games I downloaded wasn't working at all. Frustratingly, I can't read the errors that popped up because they're only appearing in Chinese, so we had to use Google Translate to read it. A lack of localization is still a common occurrence, and I've noticed this with Ayaneo handhelds, as the 2S shared the same problem even in the recent iSpace 2.0 releases. And after a few hours of trying to understand the issue and failing to find anything written to help, I gave up. Instead, we chose to use a third-party program called Launchbox that did the same thing, and I suggest using this or RetroArch instead of iSpace. This was disappointing since Ayaneo promoted the Pocket Air as a retro gaming console over everything else. Now, that isn't to say that it can't emulate games well, because it does. It just sucks getting to that point. Ayaneo software continued to be a pain point when we tried to use Sound Tap Magic, a feature in many of the company's other handhelds. It just doesn't work. We had similar issues with the Ayaneo 2S, so it isn't isolated to the Pocket Air. We tried 10 retro games, which Ayaneo claims Sound Tap Magic works best for, and none of the games we played had any rumble work whatsoever. We emulated some of the same games on the ROG Ally to ensure it wasn't the ROMs. All of the games on the Ally had rumble working just fine. We tried to find games with lots of potential and rumble opportunities, yet while the motors in the Ally fired up, the Pocket Airs remained stagnant. We even tried some games through Game Pass, and we still couldn't get the rumble to start. I think this feature needs to go back to the drawing board or just eliminate the rumble entirely because it's not quite working. What can also be improved is the size of the buttons, D-pad, and thumbsticks. I've got gigantic hands and I struggle to use the Pocket Air or any of the Air devices from Ayaneo. This is especially true for the buttons since I can fit the entire ABXY layout underneath my thumb. The sticks aren't as bad, though we do prefer taller sticks on them as these are very close to the body. The final negative that we have isn't Ayaneo's fault. It's a known problem that many popular Android games just don't recognize built-in gamepads. Games like Genshin Impact and Call of Duty Mobile greatly benefit from having a controller connected, and it was disappointing that we had to awkwardly hold the Pocket Air to use the touch controls as opposed to the built-in gamepad. Hopefully, at some point there's an update that enables this relatively soon. But with all of that being said, I have to say that once everything is up and running, there is very little on the market that rivals what the Pocket Air offers. I'd even say it's among the best Android gaming devices available. Wii and newer titles may struggle to run, but anything that came out on PS2, GameCube, or below runs perfectly fine. We can't show you any of this, but upscaling Kirby Air Ride to 1080p with anti-aliasing at 2 times, we got a solid 60 frames using Dolphin. And at the same time, Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 had to run close to the original settings to achieve the same result through the PS2 emulator PCSX2. Surprisingly, Super Mario Galaxy hovered around 60 even with some upscaling on the internal resolution. We'd suggest sticking to smaller or less graphically intensive 3D games on Wii and PS2 for the best results. But I also appreciate that the Pocket Air has a dedicated folder for retro games out of the box, complete with an organized array of labeled folders depending on the game system. We only needed to put our files in the correct folder and then extract it. Downloading and moving files on Android is pretty tedious, so I'm happy you can plug in the Pocket Air into your PC and quickly transfer all the files you need through a USB connection. And outside of emulating, the Pocket Air is perfect for cloud gaming and streaming games through something like Steam Link. The gamepad doesn't have the same connectivity issues as the ROG Ally on Game Pass, and I could play different games without a problem besides the lack of the rumble feature. nature. And the Pocket Air's lengthy battery life is another highlight. If all you plan on doing is emulating or streaming games, you can easily get a day's worth out of it. I'm not sure how running Genshin or other native Android titles will affect your game time, but it should last for hours without worrying about a charge. And overall, the Pocket Air is one of the best Android gaming devices you can buy. Sure, its software is still iffy in places, but that can be forgiven since you can replace most of that with other apps besides Window. I wouldn't recommend this for people with larger hands or those trying to get into emulation for the first time. However, I will say that if you're already ingrained in the cloud gaming and emulating side of things, you can't really go wrong with the Ayaneo Pocket Air.